Jesus tells us to build our house on a rock, not on the sand, so that when the storms of life come, we can withstand it. You discover whether your house is built on the rock or not when the storm hits you.
Mark, I've read your book, I've enjoyed it, but for the people of Grace Commons, can you tell us about your beloved son, Thomas? Take us through his journey.
Well, Thomas was a good boy. He had a good heart. He was very bright, and he was always a really happy little boy. He had all kinds of hobbies, Legos, Pokemon, all that kind of stuff. He befriended people who were not popular, the outside crew, the outsiders, and he grew up in this church. Even, in 2010, when we came to First Press, he was already a Christian and knew the Lord. And, it was important to him. He said to me, Papa, a lot of the kids are getting Bibles. I'm going to get a Bible, and I'd like to stand up in front of the church and tell people about my faith. So he and I worked together on a little thing for him to say. And his favorite verse was John 3:16. Got up, and we have pictures of him in the sanctuary. He was at Fishy all the way through. We'd take him every Wednesday, and he'd bring some of his friends sometimes that were not church people. He graduated from high school in 2020, just right at the height of the beginning of the pandemic. And, it was a time of fear and anxiety early on. We didn't have vaccines, people were fighting for ventilators and whatnot. And so on May 1st, he came home from work about 9:10 at night. And we chatted with him, about how his day was. He went to his room. And the next morning, we were going to Menlo Church. We're online, obviously, because everything was shut down. And I went to wake him up for the service, and my wife and I found him dead in his bed. And we only found out later that he had bought a single dose of Xanax on Snapchat for $15 to calm his anxiety. But it wasn't a Xanax. It was a counterfeit pill. It contained 3 times the lethal dose of fentanyl. And, it's hard to explain, Anthony, when death hits you like this. Within a day, I was taking pictures of everything. I took pictures of his license, of his rail card, Elin and I took 360-degree view pictures of his room so that everything would be the way he is. His toothbrush, his razor, everything was there, would be there. And, within a week or so, we put up this memorial site that we have. And now, 3 years later, there's the memoir. And what I want to say is that same feeling about the ongoing flow of time that he's gone, that is exactly why we are creating the Thomas Larson Bodnarczuk Memorial Fund at the Grace Commons Foundation. The fact is, the problem of fentanyl poisoning is a national crisis with thousands of unsuspecting victims like my son dying every year, even kids right here in Boulder. So Thomas's Memorial Fund, that's why we're going to focus that fund on funding Grace Common Church's middle school, high school, and college ministry. So we can not just spread the gospel of Christ and keep Thomas's name alive, but also to get the word out and actually save lives.
So Mark, you've written a book that comes out October 15th. We're all proud of you for that, and I've been able to read it. One of the most remarkable things in the book is that you and Elin had a chance to actually meet the person who was responsible for Thomas's death and even extend forgiveness. Can you take us through that experience of how you were able to forgive the person responsible for what happened to Thomas?
Well, I can tell you, Anthony, it was a total surprise to us. We were waiting in the court, outside the courtroom. And so sitting about 5 or 6 feet away from us was a young guy. And my wife said to me, "I think that's him." He kept looking at his phone. He was nervous. He didn't look like he belonged there even. So then we got into the courtroom, and, you know, they call your name and you go up in front, and then we knew that this was the person. So he walked out of the courtroom, and there he was, standing against the wall. And, you know, I looked at him, and it's like, I don't even know how to explain what was going on in my heart and mind. So as I stared him down, we walked by him, and he stepped forward. He stepped forward, and he said, "I'm so sorry." He said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't, you know," and so I stopped, and I turned to him, and I said, "Well, I'm Mark Thomas's father, and this is Elin Thomas's mother." And he said, "I had no idea that this was fentanyl. I had no idea. That's not what I was told." So that was the existential moment. I felt the Spirit of God come upon me, and I stepped toward him, and I put my hand out, and he grabbed me around, and he just pulled me to him, clutched onto my jacket, and he sobbed into my neck. And so I said to him, "That was my only son. That was my only child." And he said, "Well, I'll do anything to make it up." And that's when I said, "You know, I forgive you. You know, hating you is not going to bring my son back." And my wife stepped forward, and she said, "I forgive you too," and hugged him. And Elin and I walked back to the parking garage, just stunned that this happened, you know, and it really was, I believe, the power of God that came upon us. And I felt cleansed. I mean, I've not had a bad feeling toward the guy since.
So Mark, I know you well enough to know you love Jesus and that forgiveness was only possible through him. Can you just talk about the role of Christ in your life and in his ability to help you extend that forgiveness?
I don't know how to answer. I'm trying to find a way to answer that question. I mean, look, I lost my only begotten son. That helps me understand God's heart.
Enough said.
Yeah.
Enough said. So Mark, obviously you and Elin had your faith tested through having to endure life's most challenging circumstance, the loss of a child. Talk about how this experience has tested your faith in Jesus.
Well, you know, Anthony, looking back, what I find utterly amazing is that as traumatized and as devastated as I was about Thomas's death, my faith in God held firm. In a post 10 days after he died, I remember the last part of it saying that my testimony today is just like Job's. Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. So, you know, essentially, Jesus tells us to build our house on a rock, not on the sand, so that when the storms of life come, we can withstand it. You discover whether your house is built on the rock or not when the storm hits you. We all think we're doing the right thing, but the fact is you don't know until the storm comes. And for me, you know, over the last 4 years, my faith has wavered, it's been tested, but it held firm. I had this deep inner gyroscopic sense of orientation that I was not lost, that I was on the path. And I just want to be absolutely clear that this was, you know, my role in this was necessary, but not sufficient. I mean, this was God himself embracing me, giving me the strength to move on. And I mean, my faith, Elin's faith, Thomas's faith have been profoundly impacted by this church. In fact, you know, it was in this sanctuary that Thomas gave his public profession of faith back in 2013 about his faith in Jesus. So, you know, it was tested, but it held.